Welcome, everyone. It's great to have so many people joining us for today's event. In fact, we've had over 1,000 registrations, which is fantastic. So today we are launching the second edition of our unique parent toolkit, which is designed to support parents and carers who are concerned about their children's mental health. I'd like to start today with a few thank yous. Firstly, to our toolkit sponsors, Morgan Stanley and PwC UK. The creation of this toolkit would not have been possible without your continued leadership and financial support. We're also deeply grateful to the charities Young Minds, Place to Be, and the King's Maudsley Partnership, who have shared their expertise and insights in developing this Parents Toolkit. I'd also like to thank you all for the vital work that you do on an everyday basis, supporting families and children's mental health and well-being. In today's session, we're going to be touching upon some of the most pressing challenges that parents are facing today in terms of their children's mental health. We will be hearing from a panel of experts, as well as a perspective of a young person who has experienced mental ill health. But before we begin the session today, I think it's important that we all establish a shared agreement for everyone who is on the call. This agreement is to help everyone to feel safe and respected throughout the discussion. Now, today's event is being recorded and it will be made available for replay. So do please keep that in mind when contributing or asking any questions. We ask that any comments or questions are shared with curiosity, with kindness and respect. Some of the stories that we share today may touch upon very sensitive experiences, so please do take care of yourself. It's absolutely fine to pause, to step away if you need to. And we recognise that there may be parents on the call who are feeling particularly distressed or worried at this time. And we will share details in the chat of parent and mental health helplines if you need additional support. So very briefly, for those who are not familiar with us as an organisation, we're a not-for-profit organisation supporting organisations to help them build mentally healthy workplaces where both people and businesses thrive. We work with mainly large organisations providing impartial expertise, assessments, training and consultancy, with the aim of helping these businesses to build more resilient, high-performing and sustainable inclusive cultures. Now, the reason we have focused on the issue of parents being concerned about their children's mental health is because it is a hidden and often highly stigmatised issue that is affecting parents in the workplace. In fact, our research shows that 68% of working parents are concerned about one or more of their children's mental health. Now, we have created this toolkit, which will help you as parents to navigate these difficult times. And we know there are some employers on this call too, and we would encourage you all, please, to share the toolkit readily with your colleagues, your teams, your friends, your children's schools, and your wider communities. And we'll be sharing the link to the toolkit a bit later on in the event. But what ultimately lies behind this toolkit is that it is worrying and stressful for any parent to see their child having difficulty with their mental health. And when you search for information, it can be very hard and very daunting to know where to start. Now, I know this from my own experience as a parent of a child with significant mental ill health. When my daughter was 12, she became unwell. Her symptoms were varied and complex, and finding help in those early stages was very difficult. Initially, we sought help through our GP. We had a referral to CAMHS, and we were placed on a very long waiting list for counselling support. Now, I decided to try and seek help privately, and very soon I became overwhelmed with the different types of therapists and therapies that were out there. I had really no idea what help we needed, but I also soon came to learn that many of those therapists didn't have any availability, and some felt unable to help my daughter because of her different complex issues. My daughter's mental health continued to deteriorate, and she eventually became very unwell. And despite several GP visits, we were still getting nowhere, and in fact, some of my concerns were even being dismissed. I felt absolutely desperate. I didn't know what to do, and I felt I was losing this battle. Now, for me, I was very fortunate that through the network, through this organisation, MindForward Alliance, I had the opportunity to speak to an expert who really validated my concerns. And I went back to my GP and demanded a referral to support. In January of 2019, my daughter was diagnosed with anorexia nervosa. We finally got the help we needed. And after 2 years of treatment at both Springfield Hospital and CAMS, my daughter was discharged. And I'm absolutely grateful for the care and the support that she received during that time. Now, I want to end my story with a message of hope. You know, my daughter is now doing very well. She lives in recovery. And whilst her anxiety in particular has not gone away, thanks to the care and support that we have received, she has learned how to manage her mental health. She is now 19. She lives away from home. She is studying at university. She has found a love for clubbing and socializing, in fact, maybe a little bit too much. But a few years ago, I did not think that that would ever be possible. So, a few of the things that I have learned on my journey, firstly, is to trust your instincts. You know your child best. If you think something is wrong, then you are probably right. There is lots of help. There is lots of advice out there if you know where to look. And that's precisely what we hope this toolkit will do. Involve the school, involve friends, involve the family. You know, we've all heard the saying, it takes a community to raise a child. Well, that was certainly my experience. And probably one of the most beneficial things that I found in my experience was spending time with other parents and hearing their experiences and learning from what worked for them. There are more of us out there than you know. Expect setbacks and relapses. These do happen. 6 months after being discharged from CAMS, my daughter attempted suicide. There will be these ups and downs, and this is very much a normal part of the recovery journey. And prioritize your self-care. You know, it's really important as a parent that you stay well, well enough to support your child. And to employers out there, you know, I was very lucky to be working with an organisation who were incredibly supportive, who allowed me the flexibility and the time to manage my work around my daughter's needs. And without this support, I think I would have had to have left my job. So that is my story. I'd now like to welcome Sue. Sue is a young activist for young minds, and Sue has kindly agreed to share their story with us today. Over to you, Sue.
Thank you, Alison, and hello, everyone. My name is Sue. I am 17 years old, and I'm part of Young Minds Activist Program. I just want to share with you some of my thoughts on caring for young people, especially after what I experienced myself as a child. So let me tell you a bit about my childhood first. I've always had this sense of being different. Like even at the beginning of nursery, so that was when I was around 3, I rarely played with other kids on the playground and, instead preferred to stay on my own, reading books or just daydreaming. I didn't really have friends, and sometimes kids would say to me that nobody liked me and they would try to stay away from me. Pretended I didn't care, but I was, and I am still quite sensitive and desired to connect with others. So I tried to change things. I tried to join the games that I played, even if I found it boring. But more importantly, I tried to imitate others around me, like their sense of humor, their body language, or even the way they smiled. And that led me to the first time I felt something that would become the norm, that dilemma between authenticity and social acceptance. You see, I felt that as quirky and introverted as I was, being myself meant others wouldn't accept me. But on the other hand, when I did mask and gain friends that way, not only was it exhausting, the connection also felt artificial and just not satisfying. And as I grew up and throughout my primary school, that dilemma persisted. I had only a few friends, and I was quite obsessive and paranoid in those friendships because they meant a whole lot to me. I didn't want to lose them and experience the same sense of loneliness I felt as a kid again. It's almost like every social interaction was a test, and I either passed, mostly by masking or people pleasing, or failed, leaving me feeling ashamed of myself. And the only place where I didn't have to mask was in front of my mother. She made it clear that she loved me unconditionally, and I could share with her emotions I didn't feel safe sharing elsewhere, most of which happened to be quite negative, as you'd imagine. These included the frustration at having to mask at school, which made me often quite irritable towards her, even if those emotions weren't directed at her at all. In fact, this is something I want to share with you. Your teenagers behaving irritably towards you could well be a positive sign that, they feel safe in front of you, and their anger might just have come from elsewhere. But anyway, I really appreciated her giving me that space, even though it was difficult for her. Of course, there are also things that I wish were the case, and one of them is that I wish mental health wasn't as much of a taboo. A metaphor that I like to use is the stress jar, which is this idea that there's like a jar inside all of us that contains the stress and other negative emotions that we feel during the day. And when it overflows, that's when we snap. But that's rarely because of one single event. I mean, most of the time, it's built up over tens or hundreds of separate stressful incidents. In my household, and I believe in many others, mental health is still taboo to some extent. And so we are discouraged to talk about minor stressful incidents until it builds up and the stress jar overflows in what might seem like something not that significant. On a separate note, I also wish that they hadn't been as dismissive. Say, I come back home one day looking sad because I had broke a pencil a friend lent me. That probably sounds like not big of a deal, right? And my parents would respond quite dismissively as a result. Something like, it's not a big deal. You'll be all right. What I wish they'd understood is that small things to us are big things for a child because their world is small. I mean, for one thing, that person could well be one of the only friends I had, right? And so there's a lot of anxiety and fear associated with losing them. So, with all of that in mind, I want to ask you a question. When you were young, what would you have wanted your parents or carers to do when you were struggling? I want to share my thoughts on this question, but of course, only take from it what speaks to you. So, first of all, ask how they're feeling, because that's the starting point of all conversations. Then, I'd like to suggest refraining from trying to solve the problem for them and instead listen to their feelings and their thoughts. Again, say your kid broke their friend's pencil, it might be tempting to suggest solutions straight away, like saying sorry or buying a new pencil for them, especially when it seems so obvious to us. But I'd suggest instead listening to their feelings and validating them. Something like, I hear that you're feeling sad that you've let your friend down, and that's okay. Because firstly, it helps them realize that it's normal to feel sad sometimes, and this is a safe space for them. It also gives them the vocabulary to express their feelings, which kids and even many adults struggle with. And finally, it encourages them to come up with solutions on their own. Perhaps you can even ask them, what are you thinking of doing to make up for that? And try to develop a plan together. So that's everything I'd suggest. But I want to close by saying two things. First, I understand that we are all busy with our own stuff, and these conversations, don't have to be therapy length. In fact, just a few minutes each time when your child's struggling is enough. During my most difficult times, when there weren't anybody that I could talk to, the fact that someone like my mother was willing to listen was genuinely a lifeline for me. I remember writing down in my journal that the difference between somebody and nobody listening was the difference between sky and earth. The second thing that I want to share is that these are difficult conversations to have, right? And sometimes they won't go as well as we'd like. Your child might not appreciate your effort at first, or they might even be skeptical that you're trying to trick them somehow. It does take a lot of perseverance, and we are all flawed. We all make mistakes. I think having compassion for yourself is the starting point to having compassion for your child. And so I'd like to thank you for making an effort by attending this webinar today. Thank you for listening.
So thank you so much for that. That was amazing, and we can see all the hearts and everything coming up on the screen. There was a lot I took from that. It's a very powerful perspective to hear you speak. Listening certainly came out there. The importance of listening, not feeling as often parents do the need to solve problems for their child, and this solving together. Absolutely. So thank you so much for your time. It's been great to hear from you. So moving on to our toolkit. So before we move on to our panel discussion today, I'd just like to introduce the toolkit. So we've put this toolkit together to give you a clear overview of some of the key topics to really point parents towards kind of reliable, trusted information that is out there. It's been very much designed to help you promote positive mental health in your children, perhaps have a better understanding of why and when challenges might come up, and very importantly, to know what signs to look out for. It will give a signpost towards guidance to support when your child may be struggling, when to seek that professional help, and also what types of help are available. There are also some pointers in the toolkit about looking after yourself as well. Now, we know that parents, particularly working parents, are often very short on time and energy. So the toolkit has been designed to keep things very brief. There are lots of links to useful information out there. So if you do need a deeper dive on any particular topic, there is a library of resources and links within the guide and at the end of the toolkit. So we will be putting, or we already have put the toolkit link in the chat. So now I'm delighted to move on to our panel discussion. And I've been joined today by a number of experts. So we have Dr. Rihanna Watts, clinical psychologist from the King's Maudsley Partnership. We have Judah Rasham from Place to Be. Judah is a parenting program leader. And we have Stevie Goulding, who is a senior parents and carers services manager at Young Minds. So welcome, everybody. So Stevie, if I can come to you first, what would you say is the difference between poor mental health and some of those kind of everyday feelings that children may have?
Absolutely. And I think it's really important for us to note that our everyday feelings are really interlinked and intertwined with our mental health. So we can't really treat them as like separate or distinct from one another. And actually our feelings really contribute, just like our thoughts and behaviours, to our overall well-being. So if we're feeling happy, safe and comfortable, this can really promote our mental health, because we might feel more prepared and ready to take on the day. We might feel more energised and motivated. We might just feel more at ease and comfortable in our own skin. But alternatively, if we feel things like sadness, irritation, anger, or fear, that can negatively impact our mental health. So it might make us feel more withdrawn. We might actually see that we kind of are in conflict and tension with others. So different situations in our everyday lives are going to elicit different feelings. And this is kind of expected, it's normal, and it's important we recognise those inside ourselves. So for instance, if a young person's sitting an exam or a test that day, it's likely that they're going to feel a little bit of stress and anxiety. And this, again, is a normal reaction. There's that apprehension, the unknown, and actually it's part of our physiological response in our bodies that helps to kickstart, and help us concentrate in those situations, for instance. But I think it's important to note if those feelings are really persist and sustained, maybe if they're feeling anxious long after that test, it's starting to impact on other areas of their life and actually becoming all-consuming. They're markers of when we might need to seek a bit more support, and maybe an indicator that we've got, kind of concerns with our mental health.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. That's brilliant. I forgot to say at the beginning of the panel that I'm hoping there will be some time at the end for some questions. So if you do have questions, please put them in the question and answers link. Stevie, if I can stick with you, actually, one of the things that we hear about a lot, and I know it's come up in the sort of development of the toolkit, was around the challenge of school avoidance. And it would be really good to perhaps get some perspective from you on what may be the causes of some of that, but also how do parents tackle this issue?
Absolutely. It's something we hear an awful lot on our parent helpline. School-based problems are right up there in our top 5 concerns nowadays, with school avoidance playing a huge factor and part of that. And there can be many different causes that can contribute to school avoidance. So things like bullying, you know, if a young person is feeling really unsafe in school and unsure of what that day is going to mean for them, and that actually their safety is jeopardized or at risk. We hear an awful lot about young people who are struggling with anxiety, and this could be for a magnitude of reasons. It could be that they're really anxious about kind of the future, the prospects of their academic achievements and attainments. Are they falling behind? Are they struggling to access education? It could be to do with social relationships. You know, are they struggling to fit in and belong with kind of their peers and friends? Are they actually struggling in their relationships with like the teachers or the staff? Do they feel understood, seen by them? And actually things that are going on outside of, you know, school that again can't just be left at the gates. There might be a bereavement in that family. There might be a divorce or separation that's happening. So again, lots of anxiety that might be being brought into school. And what we also are increasingly hearing is like the level of unmet need, particularly for kind of special educational needs or neurodivergent young people, where actually things like lessons and session plans aren't accessible for them. They can't concentrate, they can't engage, and actually they're really struggling. So again, there can be a number of causes as to why young people might avoid school. And I guess in terms of like what to do in this situation, I think first and foremost, it's being really open and honest with the school at the earliest opportunity, and actually naming that, you know, my child is struggling with their mental health, not giving, you know, kind of vague or unwell sort of answers like being unwell, because actually that can be logged as an authorized absence and kind of lessen that risk of maybe things like fines that lots of parents can you know, really worry about. And I think it's also spending time with your young person to really understand what is underlying the kind of anxiety and the kind of school avoidance. So one thing that we would suggest is maybe mapping out an anxiety iceberg. So you can write, and with your young person, collaborate with them, what you're seeing on the surface, and then under the waterline, what are the things that are really kind of contributing to that anxiety. That's a great thing to be able to then take into schools, you know, showing their teachers, tutors, showing the pastoral care team. And that can often be a gateway to look at, okay, what other support can we put in place for this young person that's targeted on the things that are really struggling with. So it might be like reduced timetables, phased returns back in school. It could also be identifying like an earlier start time or a safe space that they can go to at times when they are struggling. And I guess when we're looking at families in the home, it's about keeping those routines consistent, because when young people are feeling quite out of control, again, being able to rely on that routine can be really, really helpful, with that end goal always being trying to get to school. But break things down, you know, let's get, you know, breakfast sorted, let's get your uniform, let's get in the car, and celebrating that win and progress, no matter how small that might be, because that can make a real difference in boosting their confidence and helping them to reintegrate into school.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, you know, I think it was something I experienced myself. And I know it's very worrying as a parent, you know, when your child doesn't want to go to school and some of the consequences of that. You mentioned the word control there, Stevie, which, you know, was something that really helped my daughter. And I would advise anyone to try and have the conversation with the school, because actually it was incredibly helpful to me and my daughter, and to develop a plan for, you know, when times became overwhelming, you know, how they could support and what could be done. You know, in the schools, I mean, most schools nowadays do have resources and experts to help. So thank you very much for that. Judah, I'm going to come to you now. Now, this is a very big question. You know, we could probably have a whole event on this particular topic. But again, one of the sort of key concerns that's often raised is around the use of social media, smartphones in particular. And again, that's something we hear quite a lot about in the media, whether that's now, whether that's in the future. Now, technology obviously can be a good or a bad thing, but what would your advice be to parents in this area, and particularly around, you know, what perhaps would be unhealthy behaviours from a child in relation to technology?
Yeah, I mean, for me, this starts with conversations I've had with young people about both the positives and the negatives when it comes to social media. And some of the things that young people have told me around why they engage with social media and find it positive is actually it becomes a place where they connect with a lot of people, whether that's their friends or whether that's their family. They use it as a source of information gathering, there's a wealth of information that they kind of access there. And also, they can express themselves in ways that maybe they don't feel as confident to express themselves in real life. Online, they get to kind of talk about certain things or say certain things and connect with people in that way. And also, there's some people, young people have told me about being able to find their new community for themselves. Sometimes there's online communities that they connect with that share interests and share their same ideas. And that makes them feel connected. That makes them feel like they've got an actual place to go that understands them. So that's some of the positives. Some of the negatives that they've highlighted is that sometimes they can compare themselves to others online. So when they see how others are living, what they're doing, the kind of things they take part in, maybe it's not the same experience they're having, and then they feel more negative about themselves, or even how people look. So there's a kind of big piece around self-image and how that, view of themselves is then impacted by what they see online. So that is some of the kind of elements that are negative there. And then there's the element around cyberbullying and harassment that have been highlighted by some young people who've experienced that kind of online bullying from things they might post and the reactions to that, or even just feeling like maybe people find them online and say things to them online that they wouldn't say to them in real life. And then there's the other element around fear of missing out on things. So sometimes young people, when they go onto the social media space, will see things that other people are doing, including their friendship groups, that they don't feel included in. So that might make them feel like they're left out of that kind of peer activity. And then the last one I think is a negative is around their sleep patterns. So many young people have highlighted how their sleep patterns have been impacted negatively through being on social media. I've had young people tell me that they've been on their phones till 3 o'clock in the morning, not able to kind of disengage from those social media platforms because of how addictive it is to be involved in that world and that conversation. So, that can be quite a negative thing. For parents, I think it's a difficult one. I would say that it probably is one of the things we can do as parents is to stay connected to young people around these conversations. So, have an open communication with young people around what is happening for them on social media. Ask them questions about it, stay interested, almost kind of be a part of their kind of conversation around that. I think that's really useful because then that young person feels that they can come and talk to you about what happens on that social media space. And then there's a role for us as parents around what boundaries we set if we, are thinking about that young person's age and what's age appropriate, thinking about digital boundaries and what that might look like for that young person. Some of that might be keeping devices out of the bedroom at night, for example, or, regular screen breaks being encouraged, or limiting screen time, and certainly ensuring that there's age appropriate use of that social media. So that's a bit for us as parents to understand what social media platforms limits are and to be able to say, okay, that's appropriate for you to be on and that one isn't. So maybe that's the part of that. And then also thinking about what we do at home. So maybe there's a role for things like content blockers, things that we can then do to help that young person not be exposed to things that might, make them feel worse about themselves. The other thing I would say outside of that is to offer more meaningful activities for that young person outside of the social media world. So, helping them to engage in hobbies. And sometimes the young people I've met sometimes find it very difficult to even think of what hobbies they've got outside of that tech world. And I think if we can kind of introduce them to or help them find new hobbies, I think that's always a useful thing for them to have more to their life than just what happens online. And I think there's a space for us to be a role model around this as well. So, how we role model use of tech and social media specifically, I think is really important. I think if young people see that actually we have that kind of way of monitoring and balancing use of social media, but also disengaging from it and doing other things, I think that's a useful thing for them to see. So our role model is powerful. The other thing is that we can advise them around what they follow and what they engage with. So following positive content and not negative content, disengaging from content that actually makes them feel worse or leaves them, with negative ideas about themselves or about the world even, and unfollowing certain things that they might follow at the moment, which actually are not helpful for them to follow, muting certain accounts, those kinds of things are really important. But that can be done when we're in a real dialogue with young people, if we stay in that dialogue. And then talk to them about, how they feel when they see certain things. So there are some young people that have spoken to me about certain things they see, especially at nighttime, but especially before they just go to bed. And actually that leaves them in a really bad mood, really makes them feel low, etc. And they don't tell anyone around these things. So if we can as parents stay in connection with them around that, how do they feel about certain things they engage with? I think it's really important. The other ideas I would say is around us creating offline zones maybe within our house. So maybe there's certain places in our house we go where there is no tech use, where the phone is not encouraged to be used, whether that's a dinner table or wherever else you might decide. One of the things I do myself is have an offline day. So we have a no tech Sunday in my house. So to just encourage some of that disconnection from that world and to come back into real life. And to also, I'd say there's a role for helping young people to feel like they don't have to be switched on to the social media world all the time. So turning off their notifications. I know young people have told me that they feel pressured to respond. When these notifications come up, they feel like they have to respond to it. They have to kind of get back in the conversation. So turn off the notifications, give them some time from that, and encouraging them to do other things like connecting with friends, with family. I think if they've got friends in real life, sometimes we can encourage them to go and see your friends. Don't just talk to them online or on the phone, actually go and see that person, actually, have a conversation with them. I think it's really important to do that. So those are some of the ideas that come to mind. I think it's a really important subject for us to keep, aware of as parents, because social media is now really becoming one of the primary ways that young people communicate with each other and with the world. And I think it's not going anywhere. So we have to really help them to navigate that.
Yeah, brilliant. Judith, thank you so much. I mean, I love No Tech Sundays. I think that's absolutely something I'm going to be introducing or attempt to introduce in my household. I also think the communication piece again, it's about talking to your children about what they may be seeing and how they interpret some of that. I've had the pushback myself around the kind of, this is the way that my friends and I communicate, but we as parents have an opportunity, don't we, to try and do something different and get those children together and perhaps out of the house and doing something away from the screen. So thank you. There was some really wonderful advice in there. So Brianna, I'd like to come to you next. Really, it would be great just to hear from you in terms of, for those parents on the call today who perhaps are concerned about their children. I mean, what would your advice be for a parent, or what should they do if they feel that, or start to see that their child is struggling?
So the first step would be to pause, I guess, and notice, pay attention to and try and notice what their concerns are in terms of kind of the changes that they're seeing in kind of mood, behavior, sleep, appetite, with school, with friends. So kind of sort of pressing pause for a moment and thinking, sort of building on what Stevie talked about at the beginning, kind of, are these kind of sort of responses to kind of typical kind of child and adolescent challenges, or are these kind of concerns more persistent? Are they having an impact on my child's kind of well-being, development, achievement? If the concerns are kind of persisting and are impacting the child and the parents worried, the next step might be to have a kind of open conversation with their child, sort of open questions, how are you feeling, what's going on at the moment, being really kind of curious, kind of sort of not judging, reassuring the child that it's okay to kind of to have emotions, kind of that you're here to kind of listen and to understand and to support, and that there is help available. The next kind of step would be to there's two possible steps. One step might be to talk to their school, to see how they are in school and to discuss the concerns that you're noticing at home, and to see how they're coping in school. School can also be an avenue for support. So a lot of schools now have mental health support teams kind of embedded within the school, or have access to counselling or talking therapy that they can make referrals to as a first step, and those can be quicker to access than a child and adolescent mental health team in the NHS that may have a much longer waiting time. So that would be kind of one avenue. As kind of second avenue would be to contact their GP and to make an appointment to discuss their concerns with the GP. It can help to when speaking to the GP, to have quite sort of detailed examples of what the worries are. So kind of when they started, how long they've been going on for, what they look like in different settings and how it's impacting your child and kind of why you're worried. And your GP is essentially kind of a gatekeeper to the support services in your local area, whether that is more charitable or statutory or kind of NHS and CAMS. And typically your GP would be the kind of point of access to your CAMS service, so they can make a referral through to your local child and adolescent mental health team. Schools can also do that at times, so it's sort of worth exploring both in your area. In terms of the referral into CAMS, the GP would make the referral will go to CAMS would review the referral. The threshold for CAMS teams at the moment is quite high, and they can have long waiting lists. So to facilitate that referral, that's where the kind of the detailed information around your worries can help facilitate that referral, so that they have a kind of clear idea about what you're worried about. Because they do have often have a waiting list for support, you can ask the GP or kind of ask the CAMS team what support is available in the interim. Are there other kind of third sector or other organisations locally via schools or charities that might be able to provide support in the interim whilst you're waiting for that, waiting on the wait list for your CAMS team. If your referral is declined, you can ask why it was declined, so that you can then sort of appeal that decision if you think it's not the kind of correct decision, and that might be going back to school or kind of for more information to kind of evidence your concerns, or if the concerns are escalating, do go back to your GP and let them know that the concerns are still present or that they're more difficult, and ask to be re-referred. And then in terms of kind of alternative sources of support, as I said, there are speaking to your child's school and seeing what support they have kind of embedded within the school, or whether they have a mental health support team. There's usually kind of early help services that support families and parents within kind of your local authority. And there are kind of sort of excellent charities and third sector organisations like Place to Be and Young Minds, who have excellent kind of online services and can also sort of provide more direct support in different areas. So that would be the kind of the pathway, if concerned.
Lovely, thank you, Rihanna. Thank you for that advice. It's quite something to navigate, and I'd really advocate for the keeping a record of what you're seeing, because obviously things change, and that can really help when you're speaking to your GP or CAMS or whoever it is, just to explain the situation. I mean, Stevie, do you have anything to add on that particular question?
I was just going to echo what Rihanna said, really, but I guess, in terms of support, it may be accessing the help. Sometimes, actually keeping a log, diary, evidencing over time, because often parents and carers don't feel confident maybe to speak to professionals. Sometimes we don't have the terminology that might, kind of actually help us to get, those referrals processed. So I think that's really, really important. And being persistent, if you're struggling to get anywhere, asking to speak to somebody else in that organisation or body to see if actually that can make any more headway. There's often lots of community-based and local support, so you can look at your local authority. For instance, if you've got a child with special educational needs, every local authority has something called the local offer, which will give you a list of services and support for families, for instance. And like you said, Rihanna, I think it's about looking at charitable organisations like Judah from Place to Be, and I'm from Young Minds, for instance, and we offer a free parents helpline to any parent or carer who's concerned about a young person up to the age of 25. So again, there is support available. It's just sometimes knowing, how you get there.
Lovely, thank you. I have another big question for you, Rihanna, which I'll come to you in a moment, but just to say that I can see there's lots of contributions to the chat, which is brilliant. But if I can encourage anyone, if you do have any questions, just to put them in the Q&A box, that would be brilliant. So hopefully we'll have some time for them. So, Rhianna, I'm going to come to you on the topic of the kind of intersectionality between neurodivergence and poor mental health, and you know, we are hearing more and more about that as a common kind of mental health challenge. Why is this? And you know, should we be thinking differently about how we treat you know, poor mental health for neurodivergent children?
Thank you. So to kind of to frame the discussion, just to explain, so I guess neurodiversity, in terms of what we're thinking of when we're talking about neurodiversity is thinking that is the idea or the concept that there is natural variations in brain functioning, sort of, and that autism or ADHD or dyslexia, those are kind of natural variations in brain functioning, as opposed to perhaps how we might previously have considered, have thought about that in terms of those being kind of a disorder that perhaps needs sort of addressing. So there's been a real shift in how we think about neurodiversity and recognizing it as variation rather than something that needs to be kind of addressed or changed. There is neurodivergent children are at greater risk of mental health difficulties, anxiety, depression, kind of low self-esteem. But in terms of what the research and the evidence base, that's largely mediated by the impact of social and environmental pressures. So there's I guess an understanding that neurodiversity itself does not cause poor mental health, but rather the kind of lack of understanding and inclusion within the environment those children are embedded in sort of contributes to that. And in terms of what that looks like, there's the stigma, misunderstanding or bullying can contribute to kind of the emotional distress and the isolation. Masking or hiding differences to fit in can be exhausting, and can lead to kind of anxiety and isolation, and sort of burnout. That I think Sue spoke really eloquently to, you know, sort of when we're masking how exhausting that is and how that impacts our kind of relationships. And educational systems that aren't sort of neuro-affirming, that lack the flexibility or kind of they're not tailored to be accessible and inclusive, can increase those kind of feelings of frustration and sort of the sort of failure. And young people who are sort of whose diagnoses are missed or kind of receive late diagnoses can internalize kind of negative beliefs about themselves, as opposed to having a kind of understanding of themselves. In terms of what that means in terms of how we support neurodivergent children and I guess this goes beyond sort of mental health. Sort of, I work in the NHS, it sort of goes beyond just NHS sort of care and treatment, but it's about how can sort of all of us support young people who are neurodivergent. And the shift would be to focus on how we can promote acceptance and inclusion and have neuro-affirming environments that promote resilience. Practically, for parents, there's a few things that I think I would encourage you to hold. One is to embrace neurodiversity, and what that means is celebrating difference as strength, taking time to learn about your child's kind of neurotype, their profile, you know, what are their strengths, what does it mean to them, and how does that then impact how they interact with the world, so that you can support those differences as strengths and build on them. Collaborate with their school, sort of whether that's advocating on your child's kind of behalf in terms of, you know, how can this school help your child thrive, you know, keeping kind of consistent communication with them, so any kind of challenges or difficulties are picked up early and addressed, thinking about additional supports where needed, and so individual education plans, EHCPs, promoting inclusion and belonging, helping your child finding like-minded peers and safe social spaces, educating siblings, relatives about neurodiversity, and keeping communication open with your child. I think that's been a key theme throughout kind of all of our discussions, is keeping that communication open with your child, encouraging kind of expression of emotions, expression of their kind of thoughts and feelings, validating before solutions. Again, I think, Sue, you spoke really eloquently to that. You know, the sort of, we have a tendency as parents to want to jump in and solve things, and often they are able, it's more about supporting your young person's capacity and skillful behaviour through validating their emotions and supporting them to find a way through. And caring for the family, so parental well-being, and sort of modelling that yourself to support your young person. I think.
Rihanna, thank you so much. There's a few questions that have been coming in on the chat. I do have another question for panel members, but I wonder if I'll break from tradition and cut in with a question, Rihanna, because it's very much linked to what you've just been talking about. We have a question here around explanation of diagnoses. So the question is how to explain a diagnosis to a teenager so that she will understand this better without more pressure and stress. What are the benefits to have this confirmed diagnosis apart from better understanding and support from the parents and school? Rihanna, I wonder if that's one for you.
Sure. Sorry, I was just writing. So it sounds like there are two parts to that: how to explain and what are the benefits.
Yeah.
So in terms of how to explain, there's different ways. I think what the approach that we would typically take is talking through the diagnosis in terms of what it means. So kind of outlining how that presents, and I think within that it's acknowledging that often diagnoses are a label of behaviour, and that sort of it comes from kind of to research. It's a way of understanding a set of behaviours that often come together. So it has, diagnostic labels have pros and cons. So there's a little bit about kind of acknowledging what a diagnosis is in general, that it tends to be a label that's given to a set of behaviours that often comes together. Talking through those behaviours and what the diagnosis includes for the young person and seeing where it fits for them. And I think that's about being kind of curious and open and acknowledging that not all parts of a diagnosis may fit for a young person, but there might be parts that they connect with and parts that they don't connect with, and just being really curious about that and seeing where it fits, where it doesn't fit. I think sort of part of that is part of that conversation is being led by your child, because they will, for some young people, a diagnosis gives a level of understanding, and it's like, that connects with me, that resonates with me, that explains some of these experiences I've been having, and actually now I can make sense of that and I can move forward with that level of understanding. So for some young people, it can be a really validating experience that helps them understand that experience and offers them a level of connecting with other people perhaps who share that diagnosis. For other young people, it won't fit, and it's kind of allowing that space to say that it doesn't feel like it fits. Maybe other people think it fits, but I don't feel that like it fits, and allowing that conversation to kind of unfold over time, and that being okay. This isn't although it's acknowledging that there is complexity in diagnosis, and so allowing that space to have that kind of ongoing conversation. In terms of what are the benefits, it can, as I said, it can allow a level of understanding and validation for a young person if it resonates with them, you know, sort of making sense of their own experiences, and that actually it's not about failure or about me doing something wrong. It's actually about perhaps I have kind of differences that mean that parts I experience the world differently, and that's okay, and actually I can now think about that and I can do something about that. So that can be a benefit. It can be, you know, understanding, validation, and connecting with other people who share that experience, you know, peer support networks, etc. It also can facilitate access to support. Practically, our systems are often set up through the old sort of medical lens. So a diagnosis can facilitate access to additional support in school, in EHCP, or kind of support from a CAMS team. So there can be those benefits to facilitating access to support that can be helpful for a young person in kind of moving forward. So those are the benefits of receiving a diagnosis.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Rihanna, for that. Rihanna, you mentioned, and I'd like to come to you, Judah, now, just the sort of, so the family unit, so around the child. And I just wondered, from a kind of parental perspective, why it's important that parents really think about their own self-care. And I wonder at the same time, Judah, we've had a question about siblings, and how we should be thinking about siblings in all of this. So I just wonder if you could perhaps provide some commentary around possible strategies or approaches parents could take. Oh, you're on mute at the moment, Judah. I don't know if that's you or us.
I'm unmuted here. Can you hear me?
Oh, there we go. Okay, I can hear you now.
Yeah, when the subject of parental self-care comes up, I always think of the analogy around being on an aeroplane and being cold around, when we lose cabin pressure and masks fall from the ceiling, you put on the mask or the person next to you that you're with, including a child, before you put on, you put on your own mask before you put on the other child. See, I did it as well. I did that natural thing, which is to think of the other person first. And I think that's what happens when it comes to parental self-care many times, is that we think of, I need to put on my child's mask and help them to breathe before I breathe, when actually there's a really important role for you to be breathing and to be having your own oxygen supply. And when it comes to self-care as a caregiver, you can't pour from an empty cup. So in a sense that we do it as parents, we continue to try and pour from that empty cup. However, it becomes much more difficult to do that in a way that we would even want to do it, because sometimes our responses are not even the responses we want to have, because we are pouring from an empty cup. So, one of the things I would say we have to think about as parents, because I'm a parent too, is thinking of what are the things that do help me to breathe? What are the things that help me to have my own oxygen supply? And some of that might be starting to think about, it's not selfish stuff. It's actually stuff that will then help me to be a better caregiver. Maybe it's about the things I do by myself. What do I do that is for me? How do I fill up my own bank account? How do I take moments for myself to be able to do that, to replenish some of that feeling that I have, which is depleted? What do I do in terms of my own self-talk? How do I speak to myself about these things? Sometimes as parents, we can have a real strong inner critic, which tells us off a lot about what we do, and almost kind of points out what we're not doing enough of, rather than actually the opposite, and having a self-talk that says, actually, I'm doing some things well, and pointing out those things that I'm doing well. So I think there's a role for some element of encouragement, internal encouragement, and cheerleading of yourself, and being able to acknowledge some of the things when they go well. In fact, I think there's also a really good role model sometimes to do that out loud, where if we can actually do that out loud in front of our children as well, I think it's a great role model for them to start to highlight when they do things well as well, and when they are finding their own strengths. So there's a role for that. I think that there's also a physical element in terms of our self-care that has to be looked at, in terms of, do we actually eat properly? Do we actually drink properly? Do we drink water? Do we sleep well? These things that actually do have an impact on us day to day, I think are something that we do have to pay attention to. The other elements around that is, do we get a chance to go outdoors? Do we go for walks? Do we get some fresh air? All these kind of things that seem very small, but actually create some element of space for us to then, revive ourselves, give ourselves some time to fill that cup, like I'm saying, So I think that there is a role for finding things that you enjoy, your own hobbies, time with your friends, watching your favorite TV programs. And in my house, my kids dominated TV. Actually, there needs to be a moment where I actually can watch something that I do like as well, and making yourself feel nice, practicing some level of compassion, self-compassion. I think there's a role for that, and practicing gratitude, within ourselves as well, for things that we are grateful for. Just those little moments that we can take for ourselves. I think it's really important. The other bit I would say is around just being around people that encourage us. And people that we feel, again, pour into us as well. I think sometimes as parents, we can give out a lot, and then not be in this position to want to receive, or when there is an opportunity for us to receive, we don't actually take that opportunity to receive. So be around people that actually encourage you. Be around people that don't make you feel judged as a parent, or are willing to do things to help you as well and to make you feel better. And the other bit is about avoiding comparisons, parental comparisons, which is so easy to do, to think about, oh, other parents do this, and actually your kids will remind you of that and say, oh, so-and-so's parents love them to do this. We get that all the time. So we have to also avoid doing that for ourselves, that parental comparison piece. I think there's something around that. When it comes to siblings, I think there is a real difficulty around sometimes helping siblings. I mean, I've got kids who are siblings, so sometimes helping them to be the most encouraging versions of themselves with each other. And I think sometimes one of the things that happens in my house anyway is that I get drawn into moments when they are not being the best versions of each other towards each other, rather than the moments when they are. And I think sometimes we need to think about how we do that. How do we catch children as siblings that are then being, the way that we want them to be, and actually highlight that when they are being nice to each other, when they are being kind to each other, when they're being helpful, and actually reward them for that, for coming and telling me something that your brother did that you liked, rather than coming and telling me when, he got you in a headlock and you didn't like that. It's more that we need to reward, finding these moments to reinforce that, and to make that become the norm, that in our house, we look for these moments and opportunities when everybody's doing things that are kind and nice to each other. Yeah, someone said it in the chat there, catch them being good. Exactly that. So catch them being good is the key. So you're promoting those moments, and also creating moments where they can actually be kind to each other, and do teamwork activities together. So as I said before, and when thinking about social media, how do we create other activities that we do together that then we can say something nice about, and say, wow, we went and went to the park and had a good time kicking the ball around, or whatever it was, to highlight these nice moments so that they get the idea as well that actually I do enjoy being around my brother at times, or my sister at times. That's a really good thing to create and to reinforce, I think. So yeah, not easy though, and I see it in my house as well all the time.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much. I'm conscious of time, and we've got a couple of minutes left, and I just wonder if I could just hear from each of the panelists very briefly, just in terms of one of the questions that's come through, which is, what is a practical strategy or strategies to support our child's growth and mental health? So if we're thinking around the kind of positive prevention type approaches. I think, Judy, you've touched upon some of those just now, but I just wondered, just a quick fire from each of you. So Rihanna, if I could come to you first.
I talk a lot with the young people and families I work with around ACE activities, and the idea that kind of every day we should have a kind of range of activities, I guess, over kind of each day or each week, that give us a sense of achievement, a sense of connection, and a sense of enjoyment, and just sort of often thinking about if we're noticing our mood shift, feeling low, feeling more withdrawn, actually noticing perhaps where we're missing activities that give us that sense of achievement, which might be school, it might be volunteering, it might be work, a sense of connection, and which might be texting a friend, or it might be going and seeing a friend in a park, or spending time with family, and a sense of enjoyment, whether that's going out on your bike or reading a book, but just noticing, making sure we've got a range of activities that kind of meet those needs.
Perfect, lovely, love that, Rihanna. Stevie.
Absolutely. So linking to Rihanna's point about, I guess, kind of maybe building resilience and kind of bringing us back to things that bring us a bit of joy and content. I think a self-soothe box is a lovely practical thing that children of all ages can do. They can decorate it themselves and fill it with things that, it might be photos, positive affirmations, memories that they've journaled. It might be scents and things that they play in their hands to kind of ground them, or it can be things like music I should listen to on Spotify. Whatever it is, it's personal to them, and it can really help in moments, I think, to distract away if they're feeling overwhelmed, but also if they want to lift their mood or be a bit more grounded with kind of everything else that's going on. So that would be my technique to maybe introduce at home.
Brilliant, thank you, Stevie. And Judah, very quickly, last words from you.
My one would be to create more special times, and I think by that I mean that just these moments where we can be having good connection with each other. One of the things that lots of young people tell me is that they don't always feel connected. And so I think if we can create more of those special moments where we connect, could be driving, I drive my son to training for football, we connect on that, and that becomes a special time. So whatever those moments are, is creating more of those, and I think that brings a much more sense of relationship and a good feeling within children that I think is valuable.
Brilliant, brilliant. Well, that's wonderful. I'm now going to have to close the session. I just want to say a huge thank you to Sue and to our panelists today for taking part in this event. I'm very sorry we haven't been able to answer all the questions that have come through, but just want to thank everybody for staying on and listening. I want to just again flag the toolkit. Please download the toolkit. Please share the toolkit. Please follow us on LinkedIn and share the toolkit widely through social media as well. And then lastly, again, a thank you to Young Minds, Place to Be, the King's Maudsley Foundation, and to Morgan Stanley and to PwC UK for your support. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of day. Take care. Bye-bye.